The Young Comedians audiobook by John Stacy. Chapter 2, Part 1, Summer. I was 15 and too young to know that with every great happiness there had to come a great shitstorm. Jack and I had a great time in the last summer before high school, and it wasn't until the last week that the shitstorm came. We went to double features at the Crest and the downtown movie houses. They were great and not so great movies. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Fire Maidens from Outer Space, Forbidden Planet, and It Conquered the World, directed by Roger Corman, who we admired because even though he was a low budget, he wasn't afraid to take chances. And The Incredible Shrinking Man, and Plan 9 from Outer Space, which was also low budget but incredibly bad. We did imitations of the bad dialogue on the bus rides home, or talked over the serious science points raised in the better movies. If you continue to shrink down to the subatomic level, as Richard Carlson did, what do you breathe? We would sometimes come out of a triple feature half woozy on popcorn, grape soda, and jujubes, and stagger over to Acres of Books, a huge barn smelling of must, rotting paper, rat turds, and caramel corn, from the caramel corn stand next door, across from the public library. Inside it was dark under a tin roof 2 stories overhead, lighted by a few shafts of light from 2 tiny skylights and a few yellow-shaded lamps behind a huge oak counter. It was tended by 2 doddering old guys with wild white hair and gold spectacles who looked like the crypt keeper, but who could tell you anything about Jack London and the Klondike, or the 1928 Democratic Convention, or the collected letters of Vladimir Lenin. When we asked, they would produce stacks of used comics from under the front counter. They did a big trade in these with sailors from the Seventh Fleet. Sailors loved comic books and brought them in from ports around the world. Jack had a huge collection of comics of his own in an army trunk in his bedroom. He loved to add rare titles to his collection. My collection was much smaller, as my mom didn't like my hoarding big piles of old funny books. Jack and I would pore over foot-high stacks at Acre of Books, sorting through limp and tattered copies of Whiz, Action, Captain Marvel. Jack was the real expert, saying stuff out of the side of his mouth like, "You see, Steve, the art was so much better pre-1953 or so. Now look how awkward this 1956 Donald Duck is. How thick the lines are, like they were drawn with kids' crayons." He praised or damned them like Rembrandts and Picassos. "Look at this cover here with the new Batmobile of 1950, Jack would tell me, hunched over the stack of comics like an elderly accountant, his glasses half down his nose and his pompadour hanging in his eyes. "The art here is by Bob Kane, the guy who invented Batman back in 1940. I almost expected Jack to sniff the comic like a wine connoisseur I'd seen on TV and tell me the exact date it was printed. Some of this stuff I knew myself. How there was a good Superman artist and a bunch of talentless hacks who made the Man of Steel look like the Pillsbury Doughboy. I had my own favorites, like the nameless artist who did the flowing fantastic lines in Captain Marvel Jr. We would select the best and stroll out with 25 or so under our arms, having paid 3 for a dime. We also bought used issues of the science fiction pulps, preferring the hard science titles like Astounding and Galaxy to the fanciful Fantastic Stories and Amazing. The first category usually had a robot and an alien, or a spaceship on the cover, where the last 2 would almost always have a young woman. Bodice half ripped off, being attacked by an alien or a robot, or a mad scientist wielding a scalpel prepared to segment her like a juicy orange. Jack explained that these were the old pulp fiction artists who were still cranking out covers for westerns and crime story magazines like True Romance and The Shadow. Reading these led us to co-writing our first story, Was It Eden, in which two aliens crash land on a jungly planet. The last lines tell all. "I love you, Adam," she sighed. He reached his now work-hardened hand out to take hers. "I love you too, Eve." I blushed now, as the story idea was mine, and Jack had some much better ones, but we typed it up and sent it into Galaxy Science Fiction. In 3 weeks we had the first of many rejection slips. During summer, Jack and I made all kinds of plans for what we would do in high school, really blow the place apart. We would take the same bus, since we only lived 2 blocks apart. We would get most of the same classes and the same lunch period, so we could pass notes and make funny remarks from the back of class. We would join the High Life newspaper and write funny articles a la Mad Magazine, and Jack would do his Don Martin-style cartoons with the avocado-shaped heads, droopy eyes, and turned-up toes. We would get on the high school radio station and broadcast the Taylor and Banyan Comedy Show, made up of some of the comedy tapes we were recording now in my bedroom. Jack had a tape recorder his mother had gotten him at Christmas, a giant web core the size of one of those fat suitcases Russian spies used to smuggle atomic bombs into New York City. It was a great recorder and it cost over $100. His mom, who spoiled him rotten, had put it on layaway at Kay Jewelers and made payments on it until Christmas, when she had given it to him. Jack was both proud and protective of it. It must have weighed 30 pounds, but nearly every afternoon of the summer Jack would haul it the 2 blocks to my house, and we would hole up with it in my bedroom making comedy tapes. At dinner time he would pack it up and haul it back to his house on 37th Street. We were great fans of the Bob and Ray comedy show on KFI radio, especially the Wally Ballou Man on the Street interviews. We did our own versions we thought were much better. One sample is our Harlem Globetrotter interview. Me: "Here we are interviewing Joe Jones Jackson. What is your profession, sir?" Jack: "I'm a Harlem Globetrotter." Me: "Then you're a basketball player." Jack: "No, I'm a globetrotter. I don't play basketball." Me: "What are you talking about, sir? The Harlem Globetrotters are famous basketball players." Jack: "Let me show you what I mean. You see that big world globe there?" Me: "Yes, it's a globe of the world showing all the— Hey, be careful. What are you doing?" Jack: "I'm getting up on the globe here." Jack was actually balancing on my bed. You could hear the springs creak on the tape, but it made his voice sound higher up. Me: "You're going to get injured up there, sir. You're actually balancing on that globe." Jack: "Right, so here we go." He began to slap his hands on his thighs. Me: "You're doing it. You're trotting on the globe. Oh, this is amazing, ladies and gentlemen." My mom: "What are you doing in there?" Voice muffled by bedroom door. "Are you kids jumping on the bed?" Me: "No, Mom, not any more. Don't worry." Sound of Jack's feet landing back on the carpet. Mom: "Well, come out and have some snacks. I don't know what you're doing holed up in there on such a beautiful day." We made tape after tape of that kind of stuff. Jack especially never seemed to run out of ideas. The vampire policeman, the midget spy, the world's oldest snake, idea after idea. We were helped in our efforts in that we were both pretty good impressionists, doing not only the standard Humphrey Bogart, Jack Benny, and Cary Grant, but lesser figures like the Robert Trout voice on CBS News, and Arthur Godfrey, and Edward Everett Horton, who was great for stiff butlers and pompous store clerks. We were pretty fair at the Mel Blanc voices from Warner Brothers cartoons, and did a wonderful 10-minute Hamlet, with Bugs Bunny as Hamlet. "Yeah, to be or not to be, Doc." Porky Pig as Polonius. And this above all, to thine own self be true." Sylvester the Cat as Laertes. and Petunia Pig as Ophelia. And, oh yes, Yosemite Sam as both Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Once we took a break from comedy and did our own version of Orson Welles' War of the Worlds broadcast. We used everything imaginable for sound effects. A can of hairspray made a believable release of poison Martian gas. A glass jar of preserved beets was great for unscrewing the lid to the Martian cylinder. If you talked through a toilet paper roll, you could make a really good screaming sound. And also the sizzle of a death ray disintegrating poor Wally Balloo's radio sound truck out there on the New Jersey marshes. I remember once we were lying on the grass in my backyard running through ideas for a skit in which our Humphrey Bogart character would become the incredible shrinking spade. The idea was that the detective would have trouble tailing people as he got smaller and smaller and would finally take refuge in Lauren Bacall's bra. I remember looking over at Jack, seeing him sideways, his big glasses grease-smeared as always. I'm thinking what a great guy he was. If anyone had asked me what I thought of Jack, I would have said, he's the best friend I ever had. We recorded an award show to be broadcast 25 years in the future. This was to be broadcast from Television Center in Hollywood, October 1983. Announcer: well, here they are, folks, the comedy team loved by all, Americans high, low, and indifferent, adulated around the world, made into gods by some primitive tribes, and listened to on contraband radios in Siberia. Banyan and Taylor. Huge applause, which we recorded off the Gary Moore show on television. Banyan and Taylor. Thanks, thanks. You don't have to. Settle down, folks. Thank you, thank you. We borrowed another tape recorder so we could play and replay the applause in the background. If you listen carefully, you can hear some guy yelling, "We love you, Gary!" in each little applause segment. Announcer: you guys have had great success with your first comedy record. Steve: yeah, Steve and Jack sound off. That was good. Jack: I like the medical western one, The Red Liver Valley. Canned laughter recorded from the Gary Moore show. Announcer: and of course your long-running variety show, the Taylor and Banyan Comedy Hour. More applause with the sound of, "We love you, Gary!" Announcer: then there was the movie. Steve: the first movie. Yeah, Steve and Jack Go Hawaiian. It didn't do that great. No. Jack: it was a total disaster. Steve: it wasn't our fault. Annette Funicello muffed all her lines. Jack: she was just hurt because I just dumped her and she took it hard. Steve: I thought she dumped you and called you a total idiot. Jack: ha! No, that poor babe cried her eyes out when I showed her the door, mouse ears and all. Steve: she didn't know how lucky she was. Are you out there, Annette? We love you. Jack: and Steve looked like an albino flamingo on a surfboard. Steve: well, my arms and legs were skinny then, but I beefed up a lot. I ran across this tape recently, and it made me feel very strange to hear it. I almost imagined that such a broadcast existed.